The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Insurrection in the nation's capital. What caused it? And where do we go from here? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Thousands of Trump supporters descend on Washington, D.C. as Congress prepares to process electoral college votes and finally put an end to the drama and controversy surrounding the 2020 presidential election. But after being shut out of the U.S. Capitol, protesters stormed the gates and took control. 4 people died and condemnation was swift and broad. Today, we'll put that insurrection into context from LibertyNation.com's on-the-ground coverage of the event. Plus, LibertyNation.com economic affairs editor Andrew Moran will analyze how the economy is likely to change when Joe Biden becomes president on January 20th. And international correspondent Onar discusses his wildly popular new series on LibertyNation.com, Lectures from Hell. It was an insurrection, the likes of which we have never seen before, reminiscent of when the British stormed the White House and burned it down 207 years ago. And who knows what the full extent of the fallout will be after hundreds of people stormed the U.S. Capitol on Electoral College Day in D.C. History will undoubtedly record that President Trump incited the breach and the violence, bloodshed, and 4 deaths that followed. But then journalists and historians from the start have had it in for the 45th president. LibertyNation.com was on the scene that day, which will live in infamy, with 2 reporters, Graham Noble and Scott Cosenza, who joins us now, along with LibertyNation.com editor-in-chief Leesa K. Donner, who produced live and ongoing coverage of the event. Welcome to both of you. Scott, let's start with you. Give us, as best you can, a word picture of what it was like during the peaceful part of the protest against what the demonstrators believe was a stolen election, and then what it was like when the violence began, and whether you thought Trump's speech was getting the crowd riled up and into a violent mood.
At the first part of the protest, I was out on the street at maybe shortly after 7 a.m., I guess. And it was just like any protest, any large protest. I've been to many of them, and there's just a kind of a festival-y sort of atmosphere, especially early. The vendors are setting up. There's the food vendors and the T-shirt and the flag vendors, and the sort of personnel, the emergency personnel, and everybody's kind of arranging themselves. And then the people are flooding in. And it's just sort of, cross-section of America. Flooding in, lots of pro-Trump banners and flags, people playing music, dancing, drummers, and all sorts of stuff, right? And just then I'm thinking also about where I'm positioning myself in order to sort of capture events that may go on the stage later, and sort of sussing all that out. And so that was before the violence, and that was a long time. Meaning, I had been multiple trips. The internet is throttled at these events, or perhaps the capacity is overwhelmed. It's tough to know, sad to say, with the shape of our, understanding what's going on there with what we're allowed to, what officials are allowed to do in terms of throttling the internet at one of these events. Trump had said during his talk, or I could have sworn I heard him say that he was going to march or walk with protesters down Constitution to the Congress. So I thought, if that's going to happen, I want to get that shot for us, just an entrepreneurial thing for the journalism of it. I want that image, but that didn't take place. And I was probably 7 blocks or so from the Capitol when the violence started. And I never got more than about 2 blocks from the actual Capitol building, but there was violence with police officers that I saw in that position. And what it was like was chaotic. People don't know what's going on there. Somebody will say there was shots fired. And then there's a lot of confusion about whether that was true or not. Other people say they saw some folks with guns. There's all kinds of rumors and things swirling around. So at that point, there's just so many rumors and somebody else said something to a third person that it's hard to know what to believe that you didn't see with your eyes. And in fact, I was asking Leesa quite a bit about, and she was informing me about what other media outlets were reporting. So to try to stay on top of what actually was going on down there.
So Leesa, you're back at Central Command during all this, calling the shots for Scott and Graham Noble in the field and bringing other authors into what was quickly descending into a truly historic event. Now, you've spent all of your adult life in journalism as an anchor, field reporter, producer. Have you ever produced a story, an event like this one?
Well, I was thinking about it. Generally, election nights in TV news are the highlight. So much information, everyone's scurrying around. And then you have things like racing to fires and floods. But all that is different than basically what happened yesterday. Well, here you had an event. It was, like you said, drummers drumming, music playing, people handing out Jesus signs. And then things start to go, as they say, sideways. And when it does go sideways, it sort of descends rapidly. So it's a lot to determine where everyone should be. I remember Scott and Graham were heading back to the hotel to feed video, like he said, because the internet is sort of throttled or just not working in big crowds. When I heard that things were beginning to get dicey at the Capitol, and I was like, head to the Capitol, head to the Capitol.
For sure. Scott, did you get the sense early on that violence might be in the minds of the crowd, or did the later insurrection take you completely by surprise?
There was no palpable sense that there was violence in the offing, I think, earlier on at all. I never got that sense. I've been in a few crowd situations where I have had that feeling, and it is a palpable sense in the air that something's about to happen, and I did not get that. So no.
So Leesa, you as editor-in-chief, how do you handle the fact that you didn't know in real time exactly who these rioters were? Or did you assume they were all Trump supporters as opposed to Antifa or BLM? How did your journalistic instincts kick in when this insurrection began?
Well, honestly, I try to be very careful with stuff like that. I don't like painting a broad brush, and I find that the left-wing media and even Fox, which is rapidly descending into being one and the same, they rush to judgment. And more often than not, we don't really know who is doing what. I mean, it's not like they're wearing signs, and it's easy for an Antifa to put on a Trump T-shirt. So I find it's best to stay in the middle in these types of situations. I even asked the guys yesterday, I was saying thousands upon thousands because I wasn't sure it was tens of thousands. I wasn't sure it was hundreds of thousands, but I knew that thousands of thousands was true. So, I try to go to what I know is true and work from there. Then again, I'm old school, and I believe in reporting the facts and letting people make up their own minds, or as my mom would say, opinions aren't worth a nickel. But that seems to be what everyone in the media wants to talk about, their opinion. But I think readers and viewers need facts, too, in order to determine their opinions.
We're with Leesa K. Donner and Scott Cosenza of LibertyNation.com discussing the historic insurrection on Electoral College Day in Washington. And we'll pick up right where we left off when we return.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We are back with LibertyNation.com editor-in-chief Leesa K. Donner and legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza, who were at the center of Liberty Nation's coverage of the historically ugly turn of events at the U.S. Capitol this week. So, Scott, the media has always echoed Hillary Clinton painting Trump supporters as deplorable and irredeemable, essentially rubes and racists. Tell us about the demographic composition of the crowd as you witnessed it.
I would make it out about 15 to 20% rubes and 25 to 30% racists, probably, by my count, back of the envelope calculation. It was a cross-section. It was majority white, but there was plenty of, you didn't have to search high and large to, or far and wide to find a, member of a minority. It was mixed sexes, men and women. I didn't see terribly many children. It skewed maybe a little bit older. And the people I talked to were from all over. I'm trying to think if I even talked to a single person from the area. Most of the people were in from out of town, Washington State, Florida, Texas, all who thought there were illegal acts or shenanigans or skullduggery or any other word you want to put it, that the election that Joe Biden says he won was not fairly executed in so many states to make it a corrupt enterprise, basically. And they were there to shake their fist and say, how dare you, SOBs? We're not going to take it, basically.
Leesa, you and I attended a Trump rally way back in November of 2015, trying to figure out who are these people? Who are these people that are rallying around this guy, Trump, who seems like a long shot? He's a bombastic billionaire. And we were quite surprised at the demographics of it. You've always followed closely and had a handle on the Trump base. So do you have a sense of what this event has done to the base? Are they emboldened, shocked, depressed? What?
Well, just one little thing I wanted to mention. I read this today. I don't know if this is true, but it sounds about right. I heard that there were a number of older women in fur coats who had, made their way into the U.S. Capitol. And that sort of makes sense to me because, when Trump was first running back in 2016, we would go into an airport, or 2015, we would go into an airport and we would see somebody kind of crazy looking and we would go, Trump or Sanders, because
right.
you couldn't tell. And when we went to
and we would then debate it. You'd say, I think he's a Trumpist. I said, no, I think he's a Bernie guy. I think he's a Bernie bro. And we would debate it for and never come to a conclusion.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, it's not just one set of people, but everyone from Trump on down is being excoriated today. Of course, Trump will be blamed for all of it. And again, that's a broad brush thing. Sometimes I wonder if we've become too simple-minded to see nuance and shades of gray. Or does everything these days have to be black and white? You say in your writing often, you talk about one-step thinking. And I think you're really onto something there. In this case, it seems to me that the Trump base is all over the map in its reaction to the events at the Capitol.
So, Scott, put your constitutional lawyer hat on. And how do you believe this insurrection will affect America's constitutional order and law and order itself?
Well, to the first question, I don't think it'll have very much effect at all on the constitutional order. I think it'll be a non-event looking backwards. But for law and order itself, I think it is a consequential event. And I suspect and predict that political violence will increase in the United States as a result of this. We had a summer long or even more of riotous behavior throughout American cities that was unaddressed and ignored and buoyed by so many on the left side of the political aisle, mostly, big city Democrats and national big Democrats. They seem to use the violence to their advantage to try to sow discord to damage Donald Trump. At least that's my perception. And it's the perception of a lot of the people who were out there on the National Mall. And because they kind of got a taste of it, I think, and in a way it was a good taste for some of them, for some of the Americans who think it's good to give some rather than to just get some when it comes to political violence. And until all Americans reject all political violence, we're just going to get more of it. And that's not what we've had. So.
Yeah, let me just say the media, the political parties and the left-wing media sort of treat it like protesting is fine as long as they're my protesters. But when the other side starts protesting, it's like horrible.
Right. One side, it's understandable. The other side, it's deplorable. People can tune into the Uprising podcast this week to hear we're going to play a couple of these calls that various superintendents of schools and community leaders have put out to the people in their community, be careful about what's happening at the Capitol, that they never do for any of the left-wing violence occurring rallies or protests. But for this one, they've gone out of their way. And to me, it's just so because they did that, then I think that means we know they haven't gotten the message. They're not eschewing violence writ large. They're only against violence that they see as politically damaging. And so welcome to more violence, I think. Antifa, BLM, no big deal. Trump supporters, now that's frightening.
And not just no big deal, Tim, but to say to the organizers and leaders of those movements that they're right to do so, that they're right to go hit the streets. It's far from just a passive kind of allowing. It's giving them the intellectual motive to say, yes, it is a racist society and you're right to hate it and need to knock it down. So I think it's even worse on that side.
Yeah, it's the old permission concept.
Now, Leesa, you wrote a piece about how conservative media coverage of the event, as well as mainstream media coverage, was laden with virtue signaling about how awful it all was. And we don't do this stuff as conservatives and all the rest. What exactly was lacking in the coverage of this unforgettable event?
Oh, my gosh, it's somewhere between nauseating and unbearable. We need to condemn violence. Well, hello, that's original. I don't know a lot of people sitting around saying, I love violence. Let's buy I love violence T-shirts. Frankly, the coverage thus far has been insipid. And let's talk about what really happened, or maybe why, or perhaps what can be done to prevent such a thing from occurring again. Instead, all we get is the same pablum over and over. How awful it was. It was just despicable and horrendous. Okay, it was surprising, but who can honestly say after all the murder and mayhem we witnessed this summer that this is the end of the world as we know it? Please.
On that note, Leesa K. Donner, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
And Scott David Cosenza, legal affairs editor for LibertyNation.com. We appreciate your input on a most memorable week. Stay right there, because when we return, we'll discuss how the economy is likely to change when Joe Biden becomes president.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It is challenging to envision 2021 being any worse than 2020. The Fed has already eased monetary policy. The federal government has spent trillions of dollars. The coronavirus vaccines are being distributed. The 2020 presidential election is complete. The last two giants of old Hollywood, Olivia de Havilland and Kirk Douglas, have perished. Hunter Biden already dropped off his laptop at the computer repair shop. If anything, 2021 could be an improvement from 2020. But that is easy to achieve when the bar is as low as the Seattle Mariners championship odds. And with apologies to the good folks of Seattle, those are the words of LibertyNation.com economic guru Andrew Moran, looking forward to 2021. And as we hope for a return to the boom days up through March of last year, we wonder what has fundamentally changed in the U.S. economy because of COVID and the election, as we look forward to lapping up on safer shores, so to speak, in 2021. And Andrew joins us now. Hello, Andrew.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. So let's start with a baseline question. What is the best reason to be optimistic about the economy in 2021?
Well, I don't really know what you could be optimistic about. I mean, even if the coronavirus pandemic fades, you still have millions out of work. Small businesses have been decimated by all the coronavirus lockdowns or restrictions, plus all the debt they incurred. The federal deficit has exploded to $3 trillion now a year. And, and it seems the only people that are benefiting in this type of landscape are the investors in the stock market. And when you have only about a little half of the country in the stock market, then you still have millions of people who are suffering. And also the other factor is that the only thing that's keeping this whole COVID economy going is the congressional relief, which is costing trillions, and the Fed stimulus, which is also resulting in trillions being added into the market. So, for how much longer can the training wheels will be needed in this economy is anybody's guess. And this, of course, creates its own problems with these training wheels, that you have higher inflation, specifically as we've discussed before about the things we need. You look at the food price inflation, you look at the housing inflation. Perhaps we'll be immune to this barrage of bad news in 2021 because of how disastrous 2020 was. Unless, of course, again, you were an investor.
Well, you've already partially answered my next question, which is the polar opposite of the first question, and that is, what is the best reason to be pessimistic about the economy in 2021?
Well, I think for that would depend on this whole new coronavirus strain that the media is going hysterical about. Right now, it seems that they're saying that the vaccine will be effective in fighting this new strain, but unless it contradicts their need for control and draconian measures, and perhaps they'll change their mind. And Anthony Fauci was suddenly declared to the heavens saying, "Oh, this mutation is horrible. We got to lock down even harder than before." So perhaps that will be the thing to be most concerned about or pessimistic about. And of course, everything else I just previously mentioned about the debt and deficit and inflation and all that jazz.
So, Andrew, you've talked about this somewhat already, but unbeknownst to most people who were just trying to survive the pandemic, the U.S. national debt, already at dangerously high levels, shot up more than $3 trillion in 2020 to a total of more than $28 trillion. So how concerned should we be about that? Why? And what are the immediate impacts of the increased debt?
Well, the immediate impacts probably will not be felt too much because of how low interest rates are. You have, about near 0%. The real yields are in negative territory. So I think in the immediate term, you don't have to be too worried. The problem is the long term, of course, because this debt will eventually need to be repaid. Once rates are normalized, then the debt servicing payments are going to explode. Right now, I think the U.S. government, even in these types of rates, is paying about $300 billion a year to service this debt. Now, that said, I've been warning about the debt for so long, but the issue is that politicians have seemingly mastered the art of kicking the can down the road. So who knows how much longer, they can keep up this charade. So I think to summarize, when it comes to problems with the national debt is that, it reduces private sector investment, it cuts consumption spending, it leads to higher inflation because you have to print all this new money in order to keep up with the whole deficit finance spending. And of course, I think another important issue that not even a lot of economists discuss is that the deficits distort our sense of the role of government. Because what happens is that the deficit allow politicians to promise the moon to everybody. You know, everyone's a Santa Claus in Washington all year long. But what happens when the rules of accounting come crashing down to earth like an asteroid? Then it completely obliterates everyone's sense of what the role of government is, which, according to the Constitution, anyway, is that the federal government is involved of the military, immigration, and that's pretty much it. So deficits are bad, and deficits and debt is bad all across the board.
Well, now you write that in 2020, these are your words, gold glitters, silver shines, and Bitcoin booms. Now, Andrew, we don't usually ask for investment advice when we have you on the show, but is gold a good investment as a hedge against inflation since it has great intrinsic value, or not so good because it's not at all liquid?
Well, the way gold and as well, of course, silver are performing right now does suggest that the financial markets view the metal as a terrific inflation hedge. One of the reasons why gold has exploded over the last 9 months is because everyone's fear about inflation. That's why the markets were, at least gold and silver markets, were so volatile during the whole congressional debate about the stimulus project. Because if they're approving a $1 trillion stimulus bill, that's going to be $1 trillion added into the money supply. So, and I think another issue too, you just mentioned, is that gold has an intrinsic value. It has inherent worth, and even Warren Buffett is now admitting that gold has worth as both a precious metal and an industrial metal. Because for so long he viewed it as just something you put in a safe and you lock it away and that's it. But now with his huge investment in Barrick Gold, it suggests that he now thinks that either the U.S. dollar is going to crash or gold is a great investment, or it could be both. And I think there are plenty of ways, if I may, to hedge against inflation. One of them is the cryptocurrency, as I mentioned, with Bitcoin, although I think that's a bubble, but that's a conversation for another day. And I think another great investment opportunity in 2021 and perhaps 2022 is our agricultural commodities. They have been skyrocketing over the last few months: soybean, wheat, corn. So it's unconventional, but agricultural commodities could be a great inflation hedge in this type of market.
One of the big changes we seem certain to see, Andrew, with Trump leaving and Biden arriving, is our relationship with China. Did the market generally view Trump's audacious challenge to China on trade as a good thing or bad thing? And how are they likely to react to Biden easing pressure on China, as he undoubtedly will do?
Well, in addition to Liberty Nation, I also write about commodities and foreign exchange. So one of the most interesting things that I noticed during the whole Trump-China saga was you could monitor the market's reaction in real time. It was like watching a tennis match. If there were headlines saying U.S.-China near trade deal, the market would pop. And then if an hour later, there were headlines saying the next, U.S.-China trade talks end, the market would drop. So I think eventually investors did become exhausted of the whole Trump-China fiasco. That they just bided their time until they got an agreement, and they did in January of last year with the phase one trade deal. But obviously, any disruption to trade is a bad thing to anybody. Whether you're the buyer or the seller, business or consumer, especially when it involves the world's two biggest economies. So I think right now the market is too ensconced in how the coronavirus pandemic is unfolding, and the rest is just noise. And once the whole pandemic subsides, then I think they'll start concentrating more on an issue like China.
All right, Andrew, thanks for joining us and giving us not an optimistic or pessimistic, but hopefully realistic view of the economy going forward in 2021. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Andrew Moran, economics correspondent, or as we like to call him, economics guru at LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with Lectures from Hell.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Lectures from Hell. It's a wildly popular new series running on LibertyNation.com, fashioned after the screw tape letters of the great C.S. Lewis, all about the techniques employed by the forces of darkness to keep the world in the dark and trick people into following along dutifully. And the author of this brilliant series, Onar, joins us from his native Norway. Onar, delighted to have you back on Liberty Nation Radio.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be back.
So what was the inspiration for the series, which is now in 18 parts on LibertyNation.com?
Well, Leesa Donner advised me to read the Screwtape Letters after I had been writing about Jordan Peterson and things related to Jordan Peterson. And I took her up on the advice, and I read it, and I was very fascinated by giving voice to a devil, to give evil a voice, because normally you don't hear evil. Evil is just lurking in the background, and to actually see it fleshed out was very fascinating to me. So I was inspired to write the series based on that.
Okay, I want to talk about a few of the specific titles in your Lectures from Hell series. What is demonic ventriloquism?
That's actually a term that is invented by C.S. Lewis. And he rather than using the term demonic possession, he thinks of it as a puppet and a puppet master. And when you are giving into evil forces from your unconscious, then you're being controlled by a demon that is sort of his basic idea. And I built on that and continued on his track, so to speak.
Okay, another of your titles in the series is entitled Word Control is Mind Control. Have the forces of darkness succeeded in gaslighting us with language?
Absolutely. And we cannot think without words. So if you want to steal someone's mind, you steal their words. If you want to darken their minds, you have to take away their words so that they cannot speak and they cannot think. And that is something that's very real, that's happening, and it's done actively in academia. And I think the way I'm describing it through as like a demonic process is very apt.
Now, another of the titles is called Existence is Violence, which that had me kind of chuckling and weeping all at the same time. But is that like silence is violence used by racial warriors to decry people who refuse to proclaim they are actively anti-racist?
That is one special case of existence is violence. I actually started out with silence is violence, and I just extrapolated and generalized it, because the very basic idea of socialism, and you can also argue for demonic forces, is that existence is a form of tyranny. You have to follow rules. You have to obey the laws of physics. You have to follow morality in order to have a good life. And the word that is given for Satan in the Bible is the rebel. If you want to summarize the Satan in one word, it's the rebel or rebellion. And he rebels against existence, and because he thinks of that as violence. So I think that this fits very nicely in with your interpretation of silence is violence. This is just a generalization.
Another title, another of your 18 pieces, is called The Power of Socialism, which is a little bit more straightforward. But are you saying that socialism is, in effect, darkness?
It appeals to the dark forces in your mind. The first story in the Bible about human beings, this is a point that Jordan Peterson makes, about real people, is about Cain and Abel. That's the first story about real humans in the Bible. And Cain is overcome by envy. And in secular terms, this was later rephrased by Ayn Rand as hatred of the good for being good. That is basically envy. Cain hated Abel for being able, for being good, and not for being bad. And so he killed his moral ideal. And I think that summarizes the core of socialism. And that also summarizes the essence of Satan. He is envious of God and wants to destroy everything that God stands for existence.
What about people that are atheists or pretty much, agnostic? They believe maybe there's a God, but they don't think much about it. Are all of these titles, is this whole sense of Lectures from Hell as relevant for someone who's not a believer in God as someone who is?
Well, this is interesting because I myself could be classified as that, but I recognize that 90% of atheists they turn to very bad behavior when they leave religion. And I think that, in fact, when Christianity now has faded into the background and in modern society, the greatest loss may not be the loss of God, but be the loss of the knowledge of evil personified, Satan. By not knowing about that kind of personification, we lose the language that we used to have to describe precisely the kind of forces that turns us to darkness. And I think that's very relevant, even if you are an atheist.
One of the impressionistic titles in your series is called Make Them Hate the Rainbow. What does rainbow mean here, and why are we supposed to hate it?
Well, I'm alluding to the story of Noah's Ark, and that's the Rainbow Alliance or Rainbow Coalition, where God makes a pact with humans. As long as there's a rainbow, there will never be a flood again. This used to be a common knowledge among Christians. The rainbow used to be a Christian symbol. Now it's a symbol of the Pride Parade. The Pride Parade could have put out a lot of people showing that they are decent human beings, but it's instead being used as sort of some kind of freak show instead. So the depravity that you see that is now associated with the rainbow is a way of stealing good symbols and good words. This used to be a good symbol. And now Christians are actively turning away from the rainbow because they associate it with something bad. And that is actually a way that dark forces win in the world, by tainting good symbols.
Well, they've co-opted the rainbow just like they co-opted the word gay. Gay used to mean something very different than it does now. But before we let you go, did writing this series, Onar, on the techniques employed by the forces of darkness, because you've done it in great depth now, did it change you personally, spiritually at all? And if so, how?
No, actually, I don't think so. I think I was just ready to write that series. I've had a lot of experiences with evil, if you like, and that experience has enabled me to personify it, to write about it in a believable manner. So for me, this was actually quite easy, because I'm just putting into paper things that I've experienced and seen clearly. So for me, this is just the end station of something that a process that I've been through for a long time.
Onar, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Onar joining us from his native Norway, and you couldn't spend your time much better than to read his series, Lectures from Hell, on LibertyNation.com. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we will be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.